Representative Nancy Mace, a Republican, had an interesting exchange with a social justice activist. He's very active on Twitter, particularly speaking up about trans issues. Here was that exchange.
Is rhetoric on social media a problem and a threat to our democracy, Mr. Ward?
Yes, absolutely.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Ms. Caraballo?
Yes.
Ms. Nomani?
Yes.
Ms. Tyler?
Yes.
Yes.
Another question I have, do you believe that rhetoric targeting officials with violence for carrying out their constitutional duties is a threat to democracy, Mr. Ward? Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. Only a few weeks after the attempted attack on a Supreme Court justice on June 25th, one of the witnesses, Alejandra Caraballo, tweeted out the following in response to a decision on abortion overturning Roe v. Wade, and I'll quote directly from the tweet: "The 6 justices who overturned Roe should never know peace again. It is our civic duty to accost them every time they're in public. They are pariahs. Since women don't have their rights, these justices should never have a peaceful moment in public again." I know.
So that was a pretty good example of having receipts, I thought. This individual, Alejandra Caraballo, is very spicy on Twitter.
She's very vocal. The tweet speaks for itself, and just to really make the context clear, Mace is describing how Caraballo's tweets and tweets like that are responsible for harassment that Mace herself experienced. I think that it is a perfectly valid, legitimate calling out of hypocrisy. I'm a little bit lost, though, in the back and forth about who's hypocritical and who's not, about what people actually want to happen. Because at the same time, you have a moment like this, which has gone viral for a lot of people who feel like the left is unfair in how it describes the right as violent and, especially fascistic and all of these things when they call for similar kinds of violence in this example. The right is also saying we shouldn't have these restrictions on speech. You should be able to say what you want to say. So which is it? Are people allowed to inveigh against Supreme Court justices and say they should be accosted and say that people like Mace should be accosted? Or do we want all of that kind of speech to be considered to be improper, at least on social media, which would mean a lot of the conservative rhetoric would also come under scrutiny? Maybe this is a good time to play another clip that people are talking about a lot right now from Marjorie Taylor Greene, in which she basically argues that if she could do 1/6 again, if she were in charge, it would have gone a little bit differently. Can we roll that?
Then January 6th happens, and next thing you know, I organized the whole thing along with Steve Bannon here. And I want to tell you something, if Steve Bannon and I had organized that, we would have won. Not to mention, it would have been armed.
Yeah, the crowd is even seemed a little bit unsteady with the would have been armed comment.
It sounds to me like a very bad, in bad taste joke she was making there. So that's what she
claims. The White House asked her to apologize and for the Republicans to disavow this kind of incitement to violence. She came back saying that it was kind of ironic humor, and she's allowed to say what she wants to say. But obviously, we're in a situation where I think in a lot of people's minds, either this kind of invective, Candace Owens, she's not a politician, but she has argued recently on her show that there should be more harassment and more open condemnation of trans people, saying that they should be discriminated against. And people are seeing results in terms of armed people showing up at these drag shows and the like. There are conflicts. We just recently had this shooting, obviously. So which is it? Do we want everyone to be able to call violence all the time on both sides of the aisle, including against Mace? Or do we want nobody to be saying these kinds of things, and some of the free speech rhetoric has actually got to go out of the window?
You're right that there are a lot of hypocritical calls for civility, and those hypocritical both because you minimize your own side's lack of civility while decrying what the fascist right or the crazy left is doing. So it's hypocritical on that front. And then it does exist in tension with this, especially on the right, this embrace of the most total free speech kind of norms, which free speech absolutism absolutely should be embraced in a First Amendment context. I don't think any of the sentiments expressed by any of the people we've showed videos from are or should be criminalized under the First Amendment. But the standard for whether you should be embraced and given a position in Congress or be a successful pundit, it shouldn't be illegal for you to be any of those things, but it is proper to denounce and criticize and call on the voters or the viewers or whoever it is to shun. I don't think those things aren't actually intention. They're only intention because we've started, or some people on the right at least have started to embrace this I don't want to call it extreme because it's good to be extremely pro free speech in a legal context. It doesn't require, you're not required to let everyone come into your house and start screaming at you or something. It's your domain. You're not violating the First Amendment if you say, if we don't, or if on our show, we're not having Alex Jones on right now. We're not violating the First Amendment or something. It's not because we hate free speech. We like free speech. It's just that there are some standard practices.
So it does seem to me that in some of these examples, particularly the Alejandra's tweets, and in the Marjorie Taylor Greene example, these are, I think, statements that come a lot closer to incitement to violence. Saying Supreme Court justices should be accosted, saying that you would have preferred an armed attack on Congress and your fellow Congress members, that comes a lot closer to what I would argue is
I don't think either does. You do?
What is incitement beyond go punch that person? I think you should go punch that person. Well,
there's time, place, and manner stuff, right? It has to be a specific person and a specific time.
Supreme Court justices, anytime you see them.
But that's a position, not a saying. You know what we ought to do at 4:30 tomorrow. We ought to all get our guns and go to this McDonald's where Brett Kavanaugh is going to be. That's incitement.
So like I said, these come a lot closer to incitement than a lot of other things that have happened on the app. Whether or not they actually meet the legal definition, they come a lot closer to incitement. And so I think the question is actually out of the realm. It's getting increasingly out of the realm of whether this is something that is protected, whether or not this is something that is in a free speech place, or whether this is something that is actually not protected speech. And how do we feel about that? Because I think at the end of the day, there have obviously been many armed conflicts that have been recorded in history as just. Every war is an incitement to violence and obviously a lot of killing, death, and destruction that, depending on who the winners are and who writes history, we don't think of as someone just randomly shot someone someday. Crispus Attucks dies in the Revolutionary War. We think of that as a heroic kind of a moment in history. R.I.P. Crispus Attucks. But the issue here is the only thing that's really determining whether people feel one way or another about one of these moments just what side you're on and who you think is righteous in their condemnation. Plenty of people genuinely believe that because of the real threat to women's well-being, ability to survive dangerous pregnancies, having been victims of rape and being forced to carry to term, all of these things that are on the line in the Roe or Dobbs context justifies, putting that same amount of violence, threatening that same amount of violence to the people who made that kind of decision. People believe that. I think what's difficult about this clip is that I think on some level Alejandra does believe it, but when pressed on it, isn't willing to kind of own that.
I mean, there are a lot of people, yes, but there are a lot of people who think that abortion is itself an act of murder against a living human being.
And they've killed abortion providers because of that belief.
Yeah.
So I think that the issue here is...
but there are a lot of people who hold that belief but are not acting on it in any kind of violent...
except for voting for policies
using the legitimate political process.
The other side thinks is going to result in people's deaths. And this is the problem. When the rhetoric is, your belief in this leads to death, then people do sincerely believe that violence is justified. And there have been times historically where whole nations have bought into that premise depending on what the cause is. And I don't think this is something that is going to be rationalized out, because at the end of the day, the only dishonest thing here, I think, is Alejandra not saying, yes, I actually believe the Supreme Court justices deserve what they get. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene in some ways is more honest here. I think she...
Well, I think she knows what her audience... I think she thought what her audience wanted to hear there. I don't know what she actually believes.
I don't know what she actually believes either. But I do think that this isn't actually about some consistent principle here. It's about who 10, 50, 100 years from now is going to be perceived as having the more righteous cause. And that's kind of a scary place to be.
I don't want to come off like the civility police because it's lame, but it would benefit our society if our elected representatives and our commentator class was a little less incitey in their rhetoric.
If we
even
were
if it falls well short, in my view, of
in the
First
years or
Amendment.
days before the Haitian Revolution, and Haitians are calling for the murder of the plantation owners, the people who are enslaving them, the people who are occupying their country, are we going to say, oh, that was incitement to violence and that was inappropriate and they shouldn't have done that?
They killed
So
all the white people on the island, didn't they?
They killed all the people who were enslaving them, yes. Should we not
The
have
women
killed
and
Nazis because they're Nazis? Are we going to fight this war? Are we not going to? Do we think that they're just causes or they're not?
They killed the women and the children. I mean,
how many women and
you're throwing the Haitian.
How many slave women and children were not only killed but raped, brutalized, and enslaved for hundreds of years?
Didn't they like? I don't want to relitigate this. Didn't they go like door to door, determining what your skin color was, and then shooting you
That's
if you
not
weren't
true. In
insufficiently
fact,
white?
Polish immigrants were specifically protected because they did not participate in the slave trade and they were seen as allies in Haiti. So it wasn't about color, it was about behavior.
I mean, if your
people who were
point is that
enslaving people.
revolutions and civil wars are very bloody,
the point is that
horrible.
history decides which victims were justified and which were not. And I think that a lot of this mudslinging, including by Mace, I think that she makes a solid point about hypocrisy, but it doesn't actually mean anything because nobody actually cares when the conservatives are in a different position where they think that something is right and justified and an abortion is murder, suddenly the tables flip. That's all I'm saying. And I think, unfortunately, this is one of those things that's going to have to be decided by historical perspective, and we're not going to get very far in this moment.
Well, we'll have more Rising right after this. Stay with us.